Okay, so let's talk diplomacy, politics, and intelligence. Here is the diplomacy tab, and it kind of seems like a busy tab when you first look at it, but honestly, once you kind of figure it out, it's not too complicated. It's pretty easy. So what I would say is divide it up into thirds. We've got this tab in the far left, this tab in the middle, and this tab in the right. On the left, these are all the countries that are still in existence in the game, whether they're puppets or independent countries. Okay. It is important to know if they're a puppet or not, because if they're a puppet, chances are they're not going to trade with you, because puppets predominantly only trade their resources with their controlling country, right? Because the controlling country is basically telling them, nope, you're a puppet because you exist to serve us. All right. So just kind of know that off the bat. Now, what this is telling you is the red means that they're deficient in those particular resources, which means they're not going to be trading them with you. Very rarely are you going to be able to get the AI to trade something to you if they're in a deficit. So what you're looking for is you want to look for the things that are not in red. That means that's something that you might be able to trade for. Or if you're looking to trade something, obviously look for the countries that have red. Now, before I get into this further, don't do anything on 1 January, okay? Because what's going to happen is 1 January, the game just starts off. It needs a full day to kind of like inject all the data to get things going. So wait until after 1 January to start doing your trading and getting everything set up. Same thing goes for your country, right? Like all the numbers up here for how much coal you're producing per day and metal and all that stuff. It's not going to be accurate on 1 January. You need to wait until 2 January to get a good idea of where you're at on that. Now, you can kind of game the system by, if you already know what your surpluses are or the resources that you want to trade. The AI will almost always accept trades on 1 January because it thinks it's like deficient in everything. So that is one way to game the system, is just trade like all of your gas, for example, all of your fuel on day 1 to get a surplus of money. But if you want to play it realistically, wait until day 2 to start doing everything that you're supposed to be doing. Okay. So countries are in alphabetical order, and that's one way that you can find them. Another way is to actually go to the country in the map and then open the diplomacy tab, and it'll have them selected here in the middle. But this is basically all of the resources that they have available. And then threat level. Now, the higher the threat that you are to them, the less likely they are to trade with you. So if you're Germany, for example, and you need metal, France, I believe, is a very heavy metal resource state, but they're also heavily threatened by you. And so you're not going to be able to trade that metal with them after, probably after you like annex Austria or something. So that's why historically, right, Germany looked to Sweden for metal. And in this game, you would probably do the same thing. You'd look to Sweden for metal to make up for your military industrial complex that is building up tanks and whatnot that requires those metals to maintain those forces day to day. So that's this tab right here. In the middle, what you have are the 3 major alliances. I believe you can create your own little side alliance that is not associated with these guys. So if like you wanted to create, an alliance in South America between Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and some of those countries, you'd probably do it, I think. But honestly, like if you want to go long in this game, you probably need to be affiliated with at least one of the major powers, or be one of the major powers yourself. And so you have those here, and this is based on the victory points that are controlled by those, by the totality of the countries involved in these alliances. So currently, the Allies have 20%, but as you progress to 39, obviously the axis grows dramatically, right? Because they annex Austria, they get Czechoslovakia, maybe even potentially Italy. If you're a human player, you're probably bringing in Hungary and Bulgaria and et cetera, right? And so this actually goes up. And then once you reach 100%, by I think 62 is what dictates victory conditions. But that's how these bars go up here. Okay. Now, this triangle is very interesting, and this is something you're going to want to watch as the game progresses, particularly for countries that you're strongly interested in. So for this tutorial, we're Japan. And so what we want to look at is we will invade China, right? And as a result, Shaanxi, Tibet, Guangxi, Yunnan, I think maybe Tibet too. They all join Republic of China against us, right? Including the communist China bloc right here. So we know that those are already lost. But Siam is neutral. They don't join. And we would like to have Siam because we want to have this French Indochina area. We obviously want to expand down here, which has oil. And Siam would be a nice ally to have to, at a minimum, have a base of operation from to go down into the Indochina area, right? And so Siam might be a country you want to watch and see how their political leanings move, because they're not going to want to join an alliance with us, let alone trade with us or sign a non-aggression pact, or worse yet, join the allies against us if we decide to join the fascists, if their political party does not align with ours. Okay. So if you want to come back here, it's really quick. So these are all the countries on here, right? But if we want to go to selected, select Siam, go to diplomacy, hit selected. There they are. Okay. Now, where do we sit in this whole mess? We are right here. Right? I hit major, which is all the major powers in the game. So you've got the Italians and the Germans somewhere right behind here, Soviet Union, and then US and obviously French and UK are up in this area. And then we're right here. So we're down here with the fascists. They're leaning fascist currently, but notice it says here when you hover over it, mostly drifting towards the Allies, with a slight drift towards the communists and moving away from the Axis. What does that mean? It means that even though they're right here, over time, over the days and months ahead, they're going to start going like this, in this like trajectory, well, probably more like this, towards the communists slightly, but basically towards the Allies. And the further they get away from our corner, the less likely they are to trade with us, agree to a non-aggression pact, join our alliance, etc. Okay? So that's where this tab is really helpful, is figuring out who the targeted countries that you want to focus on, whether it's to keep out of conflict. So say we want the US to not join the conflict. We'd want to try and influence them away from here and kind of pull them down here a little bit. They're never going to come all the way down here. They're never going to come all the way down here. But you might be able to pull them away enough from the point that they're like, you know what? We're just far enough away from you, Britain, that we don't want to get involved in this conflict, right? We've got enough fascist sympathies, for example, that we don't want to get involved in this conflict. It's very historically accurate, by the way, because the fascists were very active in the United States in the 30s. And if it wasn't for Pearl Harbor and then Hitler declaring war on the U.S., which some people don't realize that actually was Hitler declaring war on the U.S. He didn't have to, by the way. It's possible the U.S. would not have initially gotten involved in Europe. They might have dealt with the Pacific first and then perhaps pivoted, but they didn't want a war on two fronts, right? And the only reason that they immediately went to a war on two fronts was because Hitler declared war on them. Part of that was because there was a very strong fascist movement in the U.S. with the intent and attempt to keep the U.S. neutral and out of European affairs, right? So that's the whole intent of this pie chart, so to speak, is either to keep certain countries out of conflict or bring them closer to you so that you can make them perhaps a part of your conflict. Now, how do you do that? Third column, that's where that comes into play. Okay, so we're currently on Siam. One of the ways, in addition to the intelligence tab, which I'll get to in a little bit, but one of the ways to make Siam closer to our corner, which we are over here. Now, This just involves Siam. I'm going to get to later in this video how to make us more in this camp, right? Because it is more stable for your politics, for your government, for your country to be closer to one of these points than to be kind of like out in the middle or down here. Because then what you basically have is a fractured government. You have, if you're smack dab in the middle, for example, you have a third of your government for democracy, a third of your government for communism, and a third of your government for fascism. All three of those are very, very different concepts and philosophies. They don't exactly mesh with each other. And so you're going to have a very fractured government, right? Whereas if your government is very closely aligned, almost 100% so, to communism or democracy or fascism, you're going to have a very united government, which means at least as it relates to your leadership, at least as it relates to your government, everybody's on the same page. Everybody thinks the same way. And so you don't have anybody undermining you from within, right? So I'll talk about that in a moment in terms of how us as Japan gets us more united towards fascism, for example, if that's the direction you want to go, and less towards like democracy. But you always want to be aiming for at least one of these points. All right, back to Siam here for a second. Third tab. Here you can see that our current relations with them are 75. You can have 200 total relations with a country. The higher your relations with them, the more likely they are to engage in trade, engage in non-aggression pacts, sell you production licenses, which is basically like, say, for example, Siam was really advanced in the Army. I'm really advanced in the Navy. And so they sell me a license for one of their like tanks, for example, that are better than what I can produce. They're more likely to sell those to me, and at a better price, by the way, than they would otherwise. Additionally, for trade, for like resources, if they're like, I'm not sure what they're resource rich in. Let's look at that real quick. So they got some metal, got some coal. Okay, so say they got metal, right? If they really like us, they're going to sell their metal to us at a cheaper price than they would otherwise. So that's another advantage to having positive relations with a particular country. Our threat to them will affect the price that they're willing to sell stuff to us. Additionally, it'll also affect their ability to, again, sell us product licenses and engage in non-aggression pacts and whatnot. I'll talk to you in a little bit once we focus on Japan on how you adjust up and down your threat levels to other countries. Their neutrality is 59%, which is pretty standard. It's a little high, but pretty standard. For most countries, your neutrality has to be at a certain point before you can declare war on another country, like 80, 90%, unless a scripted event occurs. So for example, Japan in, I think, 36, the bridge incident, I'm forgetting the actual name of it, but the bridge incident between Manchuria and China occurs. And that gives you the option, if you want, as Japan, to declare war on China. So that's an exception to the general rule. If you want to manually declare war on another country, you need to get this neutrality level up to a certain level, or rather down to a certain level. My apologies. Down to a certain level in order to accomplish that. On the flip side, if you want a country not to involve themselves in war, like say the United States, we want to get their neutrality level like racked way up, right? That way, it's super hard for them to get involved in a conflict. And then obviously it has our neutrality, which is 89%. And then the highest threat right now to Siam is the British, which, again, this will be affected based on decisions you make throughout the game. Whether it's the size of your army, whether you mobilize it, whether you take certain actions like, for example, the Germans taking the Rhineland. All those sort of things go into your overall threat level, on top of spies, which we'll get to a little bit later in this video. But just know that the threat level can change, and it's a bit fluid. Now, war goals, this might tell you what they're up to. I'll get to this more in my strategy video about, game mechanics and on the battlefield and that sort of thing. And this will tell you their overall relations with other countries. and they're aligned towards the Allies, right? So pretty self-explanatory. Now, here, allow debt. This just basically means they're in, like, say we're the United States and we want to support Britain, we do allow debt, which would give them more resources to spend. Embargo, as you notice here, there's a neutrality issue, but what that does do is that'll affect their trade, I think, without declaring war. And then this is really important, but only if you're a part of these three. So if we join the Axis, one of the benefits to us is we can now pull Siam towards the Axis by asking them to align to our faction. So think of this as like us sending lobbyists to Siam and, you know, passing out pamphlets in the street, lobbying all the politicians, saying how great we are, and they're just buying it, you know, hand over fist. And so they start becoming more communist or more fascist, right? That's what aligned to faction does, and it costs up here your diplomatic influence points, which we'll get into in a moment, right? So that costs points. It'll tell you how much it costs, so don't worry about that. You'll be able to tell how much you're making per day, and then versus how much it's going to cost you per day to afford that. Transit rights is self-explanatory. Lets them go through your country, and then ask for transit rights. You go through their country. The AI is very, very reticent to give you this, but if your relations are like 200 and you're a very powerful country, they may agree to that. But just know that your relation level is going to dramatically affect this, as well as your threat level. All right, and then declare war. What's nice when you hover over this, it'll tell you why you can't declare war on somebody. So if we were to click on China, for example, declare war, it's like, nope, you can't do it. You have to, you actually, as Japan, between their threat and our neutrality has to be 0, which is crazy, right? Because our neutrality is 89%. But like I said, you get some scripted events that allows you to bypass that. Okay. I think I covered everything I want to cover on that tab. Yeah. So let's go to diplomatic influence real quick here. So you go to technology. You have all these tabs. For purposes of this video, we're only talking about these middle two. Okay. Now, we are not expending any diplomatic influence at the moment, largely because we can't spend aligned to faction. And offering a trade agreement does not affect your diplomatic points. If you ask someone to a non-aggression pact, that costs 5, but it's a one-time thing, so it's not all that bad. It's the aligned to faction that's really going to cost you a lot. And so early game, this is the most important for these three, you know, England and Allies, Soviet Union and Germany. But it is important to stockpile them because aligning to faction is pretty expensive for good reason, right? Because you're basically forcing another country into a different corner and forcing that country to have to counter it through other measures, which we'll get to a little bit later in this video. That's why I included intelligence in this video, because they are interrelated, along with politics too, by the way. But that is under the technology tab. And so this is saying you get 10 per day. Now, we don't need that much. We already have 51. I think it's like 5 per day, maybe 10 to align, have a country align towards you. But it is good to get, you know, some diplomatic number up here, boost that. But that's this number right here, and you can just up and down it. So this will basically say we're going to get, like you say here, if we do 5.31, we're going to get 2.65 diplomatic influence per day, and currently we're only spending 0. Right? So that's where we find that. And this is where you will be executing some of these tabs. I don't think it costs diplomatic influence a trade. It does not. Right. Now, one of the things that I forgot to mention that's very important that I need to speak to here real quick on this menu. When you offer a trade or accept a trade, it improves your relations with that country by 10. Okay? And I think it resets after 7 or 14 days. Maybe it's 30 days. I'm not sure. See here, I can actually tell. Okay, so for example here, People's Republic of China. A good way to find them in the diplomacy tab really quick. Just click them, click the map. Boom, there we go. We have 75 current relation. Let's accept that trade with them. It should have gone up to 85. Why didn't I go up to 85? Hold on. That did not go up here. Well, let's try Finland here. I don't know why it didn't go up. We have 75. Oh, maybe because I declined on accident. There you go, 85. All right, so trading is a really good way to bolster relations with a country. Just know that if you cancel the trade with them, it's going to cost you 10 relations. So one way to kind of be gamey with it is to offer a whole bunch of small trades with a country that you want to bolster relations with, which you'll ultimately probably end up canceling, which will cost you relations. But in the meantime, if you're able to manufacture a non-aggression pact or production license or get them in your alliance, then it's not going to really matter so much your relations with them because you're already in that alliance. And so that's maybe one way to bolster that relationship with them. So trade agreements, really good way to bolster relations. Just be aware to not accept everything, because if you have to cancel it, either because you're giving away too much stuff, or you don't have enough money to purchase all the stuff you're bringing in, you cancel it, you're going to lose the 10 relation that you got from the boosted 10 relation that you initially received from that trade. One thing I'll say, it's a little off topic, and I'll re-emphasize it in my infrastructure video, but just be aware too that supply lines rely on trade as well. And so, as you can see, this new green line here, this is now our new trade route with Finland because of that trade agreement we agreed to. So Finland, I don't know why People's Republic did not go up. Maybe because inactive. They agreed to give us money they didn't have. Maybe that's why. But for Finland, they're importing fuel. We're importing fuel. And we're exporting money. And so that's this. So if you end up going to war, be aware that you might have trade routes outside of your own country that you need to take into consideration of as a result of your various diplomatic decisions with other countries. Okay? So, like, if I don't really care what my relations are with Finland, yeah, if they've got something to give me that works, sure, I'll trade with them. And then I'll just have to cancel it when I go to war, because otherwise submarines or destroyers or whatever are going to come over and destroy this trade route anyways. But just be aware that that's a potential collateral consequence of your diplomatic decisions. All right, let's go back up here. So again, technology, here's your diplomacy tab. Let's jump into just really quick annexing or puppeting, because I see that as like a political / diplomatic decision. As you can see here, we have Manchuria, which is a puppet of Japan. And how do you know? Because Japan is this color, Korea is this color, the interior of Manchuria is this color, and then you have Manchuria. Okay. If you go into the politics tab, you can actually create more puppets. You can create Korea or the People's Republic of Korea. Now, unfortunately, hovering over it doesn't tell you what 40 provinces would become the People's Republic of Korea versus the 32 for regular Korea. But do know that under the politics tab, you can create puppets for countries that you have conquered. In this case, initially, when Japan conquered Manchuria, it decided to make Manchuria a puppet. Now, why would it do that? Here's a couple reasons. Number one, Manchuria is a large landmass. It's a large landmass with not a whole lot of raw materials, although it has a lot of IC, which I'll get to in a moment. You can see here it's got here. Hold on here. Let me get to, yeah. So I don't know why it's not showing me the IC, but there's definitely IC here. Anywho, IC, but not a whole lot of raw materials, right? In the middle area here, there is pure energy and metal, but otherwise just IC, industrial complex, the stuff that you use to build here. So what you have to consider is, if you're going to annex a country, is it worth it? In our case, it would create a much larger landmass that we have to police, right? Because then we have to deal with revolts and insurgents. We also then have to supply and feed and upgrade all of these new soldiers. You can see here, these pink soldiers, we don't actually control these guys. These are controlled by Manchuria. Manchuria is responsible for supplying these guys. So this right here, supplies. As well as upgrading them, which also costs money. We don't have to deal with that. In return, we get basically a gentleman's discount on anything we want to trade with them, which isn't much because they don't have much raw material anyways. Now, the plus side to annexing Manchuria is we get a boost in our industrial complex capacity. So this right here. And then whatever raw materials that they have, and then also their soldiers that we would then also have to supply and upgrade, right? So you want to make sure you have a very robust, strong economy before you make that decision. So to illustrate my point, let's go ahead and annex them. I think the way I would look at it, so we're at 134. Okay. So we have this option to annex them. Yes, we will. There. Now, doing that's going to increase our threat, which you'll see from other countries. They'll be like, "Ooh, I'm a little threatened by you." After, I mean, we're running a little bit, maybe we'll see it pretty quick. So we already have insurgents that we have to deal with now, partisans, and then our threat hasn't gone up, and that might be just because it was a coded action. Let's watch this here, see if this changes. There, yep. So look now, it went from like plus 170 to negative 280, right? Because we now have a lot more troops to feed and supply. Now, it won't stay like this, because see how these guys are almost like at reserve status. They need to be built up over time. So that's going to be expensive. We have to foot the bill on that. But then once they're fully up, they're still not going to be as good as our Japanese troops, but they're more bodies for the battlefield, so to speak, right? There's no real good answer on whether to annex or not annex a country. You really just need to consider how many troops are you taking on, what are the quality of those troops, how many of them are there, how many supplies is it going to cost you, what is the IC, again, the industrial complex that you're going to get out of that. So we went up to 153, so we went up 10 just from annexing. And it's possible it might go up even further, because sometimes what will happen is after you annex, this might not be all the way up, and it'll just rebuild over the course of months. Now, in our case, because I think it was a scripted event, we got all the IC immediately. But we only got 10 for the cost of, a ton of supply and troops that are quite honestly trash. They're not very good, but it's a way to go. Okay, so since we're on the politics tab, might as well continue talking about this. Actually, you know what? Let's pause that. We'll finish with the politics tab. Let's go to intelligence. Remember how I was talking about threat level and neutrality, and then also this nice little triangle? If I wanted Japan to go towards the fascists more. So if I want Japan to go towards the fascists more, how would I do that? Well, one way is under intelligence, and there's also ways under politics as well. But under intelligence, what you want to do is support ruling party. Now notice on the politics tab, my head of state is control click, which is fascist. Okay, so black is fascist and gray is fascist. These two. Just the black is closer to fascist than the control clique, but the control clique is effectively fascist. Okay. So the more of these folks you have in your cabinet, the more likely you are to drift to this area. Now, how do you influence the people to support more of those people in your cabinet and government to be of that political type? Well, you go to intelligence and you say, hey, bro, support ruling party. Okay. This support ruling party is how you're going to boost the national support of that political party being in your government. Okay. So if we scroll down to our country, Japan, which I always scroll past it. I don't know why I always scroll past Japan. So annoying. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So own spy priority means we have 7 free spies. That means those spies aren't going to go do anything because we have our own spy priority at level 3 until we get 10. And those 10 will stay domestically to be doing counter espionage and or support the ruling party. Okay. Notice active spies. I think you have a maximum of 10. So that's what own spy priority means. Counter espionage just basically means whoever's sending spies to your country, you're more likely to catch them. Oftentimes, those spies are going to be trying to support their ruling party. So say the U.S. is sending spies to Japan. Their ruling party are Democrats. And so the Democrat Party within Japan will begin to get stronger unless you're countering that with counter espionage to catch those spies and stop them from fomenting that support among the populace. Support the ruling party is how you use subterfuge and spy things to persuade the people that, in our case for Japan, fascism is the way, right? Because the ruling party is the control clique and to a slightly lesser degree, the fascists. Okay. But ultimately the head of state, and then I think it might either be just the head of state or whoever makes up the majority of your cabinet. That is your ruling party. And so support ruling party is a way to bolster that internally to make you on the diplomatic tab go closer down here. Okay. And then raise national unity. It's kind of a throwaway thing. I mean, obviously it's important, right? Because the lower your national unity is, the more likely you are to surrender and capitulate in war. But if you're able to string together some victories, like say you're the Germans, the Japanese, this will go up kind of just naturally through war fervor. But if you have the spies, because you have a bunch of extra spies from your, again, technology tab and your espionage, and this is where you're producing spies. So we're making 1.5 spies per day, right? You can do that. Now, you're not going to be losing as many spies if you're focused mostly on internal issues. Where you're going to lose a lot of your spies is if, for example, Siam, which I talked about earlier, we want them to be more like us. And so maybe I say, send spy priority 3. This means any extra spies that I have after I've taken care of my own spy priority, right, go to Siam. And so if I have 8 spies and I have Siam at 3 and China at 1, well, they're all going to go to Siam first for the most part, right? And then I tell Siam, we want you guys to support our party, right? Because if you look up here in this thing here, Siam is 67% Democrat and 26% us, basically. Just look at the colors, right? But they have 3 cabinet spots. So that's good. That means that they're already they've got some in with the Siam government. But then we say we want you to support our party. That means that, again, our party is mostly the gray and the black, right? Go to intelligence, go to SAM. This is what we want to make bigger. We're going to support our party. That's how we do it. Okay. I'll talk about this tab a little bit more in a second, but let me just confirm. Okay. The other way to do this, instead of manually going to the particular country and setting your spy priorities, you can do this middle part. This is just kind of a catch-all. Right? So see how it already adjusted it by 3, and then Republic of China did 1. And then we click Republic of China, it'll take us to this tab and it'll show us what their government looks like. So they're mostly communist, 35 communist, 15 effectively communist, and 16. So they're basically, that's what, 50%, 66%-ish communist already. A small sliver of fascist. Okay, let's go back to Siam just really quick. Disrupt national unity. This will be to somebody that you want to break quick and early. So if I was playing as Japan and I was at war with China, I would definitely set my priority at 3 and then disrupt national unity. So not only would this number go down for every territory and victory point city that he loses, it would also go down because I'm engaging in basically a PA war against him by convincing people that all hope is lost, surrender now. You know, there's these massive defeats. Here, I'm going to push all this propaganda out, etc. That's what that does. If I want to go to war with somebody and can't because I don't have a scripted event, so say as a Japanese, I want to go to war with France because they've got Indochina down here. But if you go to diplomacy and you go to France, oh darn, I can't declare war. How do I do that? Well, we go to the intelligence tab. We find France. Set our priority to whatever we want it to be. This will tell us the number of active spies, up to 10 in that country. And we say we want to increase threat. Basically what that does is internally and externally, we are manufacturing a threat that France is either to the world or to the region. And the closer you are to that country, the more likely that threat is going to impact your own neutrality and the people around that country and around you. All right. So if I didn't get the scripted event against China and I wanted to go to war with China, this is what I would do. I would increase threat and then, set the spy priority, while simultaneously for us getting prompts to reduce neutrality. And so what do I mean by that? How do we do that? If we go to the diplomacy thing, we go to shucks. So there's an option here once you do the start. I'm not going to go through it right now, to actually allow you to lower your neutrality through the course of the year through a spy event. So if you need to lower your neutrality, you would trigger that, which I don't know if I can find it quickly here. Let's see here. I'm having some issues with the video. Otherwise, I would just pause and then come back. But here, let me get out of here. Here we go. All right. To lower your neutrality. Annual espionage focus. Click this. This is a black eyes feature. This resets every January. Okay. We can get extra spies, so on, so on, so on. But what we can do is we can reduce our neutrality. Okay. Hit that. Okay. Now if you hover over it, it's reducing -0.02, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I think it's every day. And there's certainly things you can do to raise your threat level, which will also decrease your neutrality. But just know that there are ways to reduce your neutrality. And if you do that in conjunction with raising the threat level of another country, that gets you closer to that middle point that you need to hit to declare war on another country. Okay, just really quick, just because most of the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. Again, we're under the intelligence tab. You can do normal, which you control everything. AI can control it if you want. It's up here. And then you can do support our party, which I talked to, which is effectively get France to be more like us. Support the ruling party, which is basically, if I'm the United States and I want Siam to remain a democracy, then I, as the United States, would click Siam and be like, bro, you need to be like us. And so we are going to click you and we're going to say, support the ruling party, right? Because we want to keep these guys strong. So that's the inverse of support our party. Or I guess what you could do is, I guess in this case, you'd be doing both. Yeah. But you know what I mean? Support the ruling party is literally support the ruling party. Support our party is we're in control of the fascists and we want these guys to be more fascists and we're going to do it. Okay. So that makes sense. Covert operations, I will talk to you in my strategy video, so I can get into that here. And then obviously military tech espionage, self-explanatory, right? Steal blueprints for your research tree. Focus on enemy military, and then counter-espionage is neutralizing their spies trying to come into your country. And then if you have some spies in the country just normally, regardless of what you're doing here, you'll get some intel as well on this. Of what their tech is, what they're currently working on, what they're producing, and so forth, as well as this information. Okay, so we have 2 spies in Siam, so we've got some information on what's going on there. This is just another way to kind of whittle down this list here. And then as you can see, covert, which goes to covert operations, which I'll talk to again later, as well as the number of spies you have in each country and your priority. Along with, you only have 7 free spies, so you probably don't want to be spreading these out too much at the moment. Although, you can increase them with technology and boosting your espionage number at the expense of officers, technology, and diplomacy. All right, last but not least, your politics tab. Let's wrap this up. I've been talking forever. Over here, organization. This is basically the spread of the parliament, I guess you would say, of your government. So as you can see, for the Japanese starting the game, we're pretty split, right? I mean, yeah, the fascists hold predominant strength in the parliament, but they're not too far off from the fascists and the Democrats, which is kind of funny because it's like, well, they're like completely opposites and yet they're almost the same. And then this pie chart kind of gives you a better eyeball breakdown of what this says right here. So what will happen is your economy will suffer if the politics of your country are split like this. And I think it shows it to us here. Yeah. So I can't really go down without showing. So see neutrality, 1911 U.S. commercial agreement, then low popularity. So we have low popularity because our ruling party, these guys, just hover over there one more time so you can see it. Low popularity. These guys are barely in control of the government. And you effectively have 2, arguably 4, if you include the market liberals and the socialists, right behind you in terms of influence in policy and doctrine and philosophy of how things should be run and whatever, right? So you got to boost that. Now, again, one of the ways you boost that is under intelligence for your own country, support the ruling party. That's how you boost it. That's one way. Another way you boost it is make sure that you get rid of these blue guys. Okay? Them sitting on a cabinet post in your government gives them influence, gives them credibility for their party. That's bad. So you want to take them out. And it doesn't even matter if you like the stats they're giving you. Trust me, that plus 90 money is nice. But if you want to boost your popularity and basically have a monopoly over your government, which is good for your economy, ultimately, you got to take these guys off. Now, maybe you want to keep this guy initially because he gives you the plus 90. Okay, fine. But then get rid of this guy. Now, he gives you a boost to your research, but I just don't think that's worth it, right? So you go with like plus 2.5 money, maybe. But this guy's closer to your government, so you say, you know what? Put him in there. All right, so that's how you influence this number right here. Which I wish let me turn that off. And then just say, like, if I were to take him out, these are your options. Not as good, right? Admittedly, that plus 90% money is really awesome. I think it shows it to you up here, the modifier. Yeah, see, so if you hover over it, we're making 4 additional money a day, in part because we're getting that plus 90% laissez-faire capitalist from that guy. So maybe keep like one guy here, but otherwise we have all control click here with this one dude here. And even maybe we kick him out too if we can. So put a, I don't know, naval organization guy, fine, whatever. I didn't realize not Yamamoto was fascist, but maybe he was. So this is how you influence your political popularity and bolster your control over your popularity in an organization, is to make sure your cabinet is all of your party. What you can do is in peacetime, kind of do it this way. And then in wartime, maybe make sacrifices and put other people in that better represent doctrines that you want to boost. But just be aware that this does have an effect over this popularity, along with your intelligence operations internally in the country. I don't know if these so much have an effect over your popularity. You can look into them. Well, actually, sorry, they do. So for civil law, for example, if we're able to get down to repression, which in order to get that, the control click has to have 70 popularity and be at war. So say we went to war with China and we had 70 popularity. We could do repression, which decreases our money a little bit, but doesn't require as many consumer goods during war. Our counter intel's better, but we get ruling party plus 10, right? So that's a really good way to boost ruling party support and really get just a stranglehold over popularity in our government and get rid of that low popularity over there. Perhaps get high popularity, which would bolster our research modifier, our territorial pride, which means our guys fight better on territories that we own, and then boost that national unity, which makes it harder to force us to surrender, right? So just know that these also have that effect, but the nice thing is it's all self-explanatory, right? So you can just kind of look for it. Military draft. I don't think that has anything. Nope. Just gonna go through this really quick. Okay, so while I click through these, I think this is probably the last thing we talk to, and I'll be done. Here is your create puppets. Just be aware. I don't ever use this up here, to be honest, but I guess this is the kind of really quick. Oh, let's see. Let's see how our convoys are doing, that sort of thing. But down here this is kind of a evolving chart, right? So kind of think of it as if you're in peacetime, how your economy would look versus how your economy would look ramping up for war, and then how your economy would look actually in war. Okay. So military service, 3-year draft. That's pretty extreme for a peacetime country. Consequently, we are losing -4% on our industrial capacity, minus 20% on money, and then minus 5% on consumer goods during peacetime. Peacetime, that's the operative word, right? So what does that mean? It basically just means like we're having to pay a lot extra to maintain a larger army than we would otherwise, right? Whereas if you were at like 6-month draft, that's a good peacetime exercise because you're saving on IC, you have a larger industrial capacity, but your officer recruitment's going to suffer and your peacetime manpower rotation stuff, so et cetera, right? So think of it this way, like it'll be harder to ramp up once you go to war when you're on this extreme versus down here on this extreme, which is more expensive. But if you were to go to war tomorrow, you'd be in a better position. All right. Just know, and I'm not going to go through all these in detail because they're all self-explanatory, but just to be aware that as events evolve, these varying things are going to open up to you, and you'll have the option to adjust if you want to. So for example, educational, you should be able to adjust all 3 of these. Yep. And this is basically saying, hey, we're spending a lot of money on education. As a consequence, we're losing a ton of money and a ton of IC, but our research is boosted by 10% and our officer recruitment is boosted by 30%. Now, if you don't want to lose the IC and all the money, but you want to keep some of these bonuses, you could drop it down to large educational investment where instead of 50% money, you're losing 35, but you no longer have the IC hit and you're still getting some of a leadership bonus and some of the officer bonus. And just be aware that these all do different things. State press, this is affected in part by your government type, right? So fascist governments are able to control the media far more than democratic governments. As a consequence, you are going to have issues with, if you're a democratic country, you're probably up here at the free press, tendency to drift, right? So the US, you're more likely to drift towards fascist factors because you're unable to control that narrative. Your counter-espionage is lower, right? Because you're a more open society, but you make a lot more money because people are free to do what they do, learn what they want, be entrepreneurs, etc. Whereas on the flip side, if you're down here propaganda press, like Nazi Germany, the revolt risk is a lot lower because you have a really stranglehold over information and propaganda. As a result, people are bought in because they're buying into the propaganda. They're not open to free ideas and outside ideas. But your research efficiencies decrease because people aren't going to be as entrepreneurial, so to speak, or as open-minded about new ideas. And your tendency to drift is going to be influenced. Okay, so just realize that you have all these different things, and depending on your government type, all of these options are going to be affected. And then also for democratic countries in particular, you'll see a huge change in your options once you go from peacetime to war, like with conscription, for example, which even with Japan being the type of country it is in 1936, we don't have emergency conscription or that stuff yet until we get a war. All right. You can replace these guys. Just be aware that once you replace them, you don't get to bring them back again. So if we were to replace the Chief of the Navy, him with Yamamoto, and if we wanted to bring him back later on, we won't be able to. Just be aware of that. And then last but not least, then I will conclude this video, mobilize. This basically means that all of your forces that aren't already mobilized, which will be a large number of them because you're in peacetime, you click this button, and then I think within like 30 days, click that. Which, by the way, other countries will be notified you're mobilizing, and you'll probably see other countries mobilize in response. I don't know. I think it's like 30 days, and it says it somewhere. I just don't know where it's at. It'll tell you how long until your troops are fully mobilized. And just be aware of what that means is basically your forces that look like they were at full strength actually weren't. And now what you're doing is like, for example, here, this unit is a reserve unit. It is mobilized and reinforced to full strength. We click the mobilize button, so now they are mobilizing. And I think it'll tell us the strength is 80 out of 100. And depending on the supply and all that sort of thing, it'll determine how quickly it takes to mobilize. But usually it's about 30 days. One last thing, I know I said I was going to shut up, is up here. This little check mark thing is just telling you have events to choose from down here in your diplomacy tab. These are just black ice events that you can trigger. And then more efficient laws. I mentioned this in my overview video. This doesn't necessarily mean there's something better you can do. This is just the AI saying, hey, you have options available to you if you want to do it. And so effectively what it means is under consumer protection, we can move up to mixed industry if we wanted to. Does that mean we want to? Not necessarily. So this will probably be up here most of the game unless you right click, which you can't do, and get rid of it. I think you can right click these things. Apparently you can't. So it'll be up there most of the game. And it's just telling you, hey, there's things you can change if you want to. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. All right, so hopefully that was helpful for y'all. If you found it helpful, please like the video. Just be aware that when you mobilize in peacetime, there is a additional cost for this, which will show up in like your supply, along with other areas that you hover over. But if you found this helpful, please like, and as always, please subscribe if you aren't already. It'll help people find the channel. And with that, I will conclude this video. And up next will be the logistical supply chain and how that works in this game.